Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Klingberg Wing Mark II development. I'm Raul Klingberg, your host. We're out in the shop today, behind the table here, and I got a slew of materials and parts here with me, and I'm going to talk about materials and structural design concepts for ultralight aircraft. I don't know if I'm going to make it into a 3-part series, 4-part series, or just one really long video and people can slog through it. But I've been getting a series of very insightful and really spot-on, terrific questions about why'd you do this and why'd you do that, and oh gosh, I'd never do that. You know, a couple of those hair on fire kind of things. It's like, nobody in his right mind would do that with a structure for an aircraft. I don't think anybody's ever sent me a comment and said nobody in his right mind, but in real life my friends have said that. So and we concluded that in some cases I'm not in my right mind, but sometimes I'm breaking new territory and doing things a little differently than have been done in the past, and I thought I'd share some of that with you. So that said, I'm going to talk a little bit about design philosophy for ultralight aircraft, and particularly for my flying wing. Now, my flying wing, it's a glider, and it's meant to be foot launched. And I wanted to have something that was a 15-meter span so I could say, hey, it's a standard class sailplane that you can run and take off with. Because I just thought that'd be pretty cool. Plus, I thought it'd be pretty slick if I had an aircraft a foot-launched aircraft that had enough performance to do 1,000 kilometers in a day. And that would be a tremendous goal. And that is still my goal. When all is said and done, you have to pick some key parameter of aircraft design that everything else falls out of or is derived from. There's one overarching factor that must be met, and everything else is dials that you can turn. And for this type of aircraft, that turns out to be weight. Performance to do that type of long flight. Now, that's the second seat to weight. And types of materials that are used and how they're put together. Any other design factor comes after weight. So one could say that this is a weight-driven design, or the design is created to a weight. Now, that is hardly ever done in the aircraft world. Usually weight is somewhere further down the list. Usually there's some performance parameter that drives the design, but that is not the case here. So for my particular design, just to start with, to get off the starting blocks, it's a very unusual approach that I'm going to let weight drive the whole thing. So I picked a weight of 100 pounds. And I'm going to try to get as close to 100 pounds as I can. And it has to be transportable, and it has to be this, and it has to be 1,000 other things. But by God, it better weigh darn close to 100 pounds, because I ain't going to pick up much more than 100 pounds and run downhill with it. And I know for a fact that several approaches that have been made for this type of aircraft have had problems with weight. And they start out with, I want to have this performance, I want to be able to do that, and I'm going to have this type of design. And they go off and they build, they design under conventional methodologies, and they go off and build, and you got 130 pounds, 150 pounds, 175 pounds, 200 pounds. There was a glider done recently that initially the concept was, oh, we're going to do this as an ultralight sailplane, and it might be foot launchable. And we're going to make it light. But there were other driving factors. I think by the time they were done, they were over 200 pounds. So you cannot get to the foot launchable range unless you lock in a workable weight up front and let everything else flow from there. So that means, in terms of aircraft design, you pretty much have to start with a clean sheet, aerodynamically and structurally, but specifically structurally. And if you do things the way they've always been done, the conventional way, you're not going to hit the weight. It's just not going to happen. You'll end up with an aircraft that weighs 150 pounds. It's hard to get around that number. And as I like to say, as a designer, if we do everything exactly the same as it's been done before, well, you end up with the same results. That's just by definition. You can't move forward and hit new numbers and do new things unless you're willing to step away from the conventional, well-known method of solving the problem. You're just gonna be forced to work in unknown territory. So that means it's, of course, risky. It is problematic, it's challenging, it's expensive, it's all those things. But the important thing that you have to keep in mind all the time is it's risky. In terms of, I like to tell people, I haven't a clue what I'm doing. I'm making this up as I go along. I have to test and experiment and figure out what works because I'm designing to weight. And I can't pick up books and it says, oh, this structure will work in this type of aircraft and it's got this incredible strength to weight ratio and it'll solve all your problems. It just doesn't exist. So I've had to create those structural methods as I go along. And as I do that, people get excited. They seem to, well, they get excited for good reason. They go, well, that could be dangerous. It could be hazardous. That's a bad plan. And I try to assure them that things are being done carefully. I do analysis and I do testing and I move forward carefully. But they're comparing to known standards. And that's fine. But those known standards are not going to get to an aircraft that meets the 100-pound weight limit. Just can't be done, as far as I know. And I've played with these materials a lot. So it's down to understanding what the drivers are on weight, and then working with the materials that are available to create something that has the appropriate strength to weight ratio and stay within the 100 pounds. So what I had to do is I had to take my basic knowledge and say, oh, the wing skins have to be in this weight range, and the spar has to be in this weight range, and the covering, and this, that, and the other thing. And put in some ballpark numbers in a spreadsheet, and then start an iterative design process where, okay, I would like one of the basic parameters I have is, on average, for the entire aircraft, I want the wing to weigh 2 pounds per linear foot of span. I got a 50-foot span aircraft, 2 pounds per foot, 100 pounds. And that's for the entire aircraft, not just the wing. That includes the pilot's cage and all the accoutrement. So that means the wing itself has to weigh less than 2 pounds per foot on average. So my goal in this particular case was to create a wing that weighed 2 pounds per foot or close to that at the root and got lighter as it went out. And I figured I might come in at about 1 3/4 pounds per linear foot of wing on average. And that's about where I'm running right now. And then I started breaking it down from there. How much weight can I allocate for skins? How much for this and how much for that? And I have to work with certain known materials that we have available. And we know for a fact that when you're home building, for composite materials, the resin that you use to rigidize the cloth will weigh almost exactly the amount of the cloth. In fact, it's about a 60-40 ratio is what it works out to be. If you're working in a factory with pre-prey, you can get that pretty close to 50-50, which is optimum, but we can't really get that at home. So I had to work with that parameter to understand where my weight is going in the aircraft and what I can work with to reduce weight on the aircraft. And as you analyze this and you dive into the problem, you discover some very interesting facts. Number one, half of the weight of the aircraft is in glue, resin, and other bonding components, urethane glue, epoxy, whatever. But if you have an aircraft that weighs 100 pounds, 50 pounds is in glue. So the more glue you use, the heavier your aircraft. So you need to try to create a design that uses less resin and less glue. That's a big driver. And that can drive how you actually do the design or how you do the actual building of the components. You don't want to use any resin that's not absolutely needed to keep this cloth rigid. If you're using resin to fill up holes and voids and stuff like that, it's all wasted. And it's a lot of weight. It can add up in a huge hurry. So that's a big driver, glue and resin. Got to find a way to minimize the usage of that. I thought I'd show you an example here of the impact of the foam picking up resin and what the end result is in terms of aircraft weight. What I have here are two identical samples in terms of the foam core and the materials on them. This is some 1/16 inch thick Arex foam, which actually has very fine cell structure to it. And it has some essentially 3-ounce hybrid carbon fiber Kevlar on one side, and it has some 4-ounce carbon fiber on the other side. And the only difference between these two is how they were laid up. One of these was done in what I call a transfer method. The other one was done in traditional wet layup. The wet layup one, the fabric is placed dry on the foam and epoxy is poured on it and then spread around, and you squeegee it out until the fabric is fully wetted out. And that was done on both sides here for this one. And despite the fact that they look the same, they were made in two different ways. This one is a transfer layup, where I take the fabric and put it on a plastic sheet and wet out the fabric completely and then transfer it to the foam and squeegee it onto the foam, and in hopes that it doesn't transfer quite as much resin. What happens is there's always little spaces in the fabric, little openings between the weave, and when you wet it out on the plastic, that stays behind when you pick it up. You can imagine if it were a really loose weave like this, the epoxy that's sitting in the gap here, only some of it goes with the fabric and some of it stays behind stuck on the plastic. And that is generally extra resin that's not needed in order to do the layup. The only resin that's needed to do the layup is what's actually wetting out the fabric, the tows that are woven together. This process is a tad tricky because if you squeegee the fabric too dry on the plastic sheet, when you transfer it, there won't be enough resin left over to bond it securely to the foam. So there is a little bit of a learning curve and skill to this so that you have enough resin left on the fabric such that when you vacuum bag it, it's fully bonded to the foam. But you can do it, do a little bit of practice, and you learn to look for the difference in the finish when you're done. And there are some tricks that you can see in my other videos that I use in terms of flipping the plastic over and looking at the color of the fabric and make sure that it's fully wetted out, and back over the other way, and then I look at the other surface at an angle and make sure that it's glossy and not really dry. But it is a judgment call, and it's something that you get used to doing. Now, let's look at the difference between the two. So this one's a wet layup, this one's the transfer layup. They are approximately the same strength. There's really not any difference in strength or other structural capabilities. The wet layup one weighs 23 grams, the other one weighs 22 grams. So you're saying, well, a gram, can you be that accurate? Well, yes, I've run this test several times, and that number comes in pretty true. So a 1 gram difference between the two for this area of layup. Now, what does that work out to in reality? Well, this is a little under a square foot. So this one is 0.114 pounds per square foot, and this one is 0.10912 or 13 pounds per square foot for this one. Doesn't sound like much, but if you had a entirely, if you built your entire aircraft out of sandwich panel like this, that includes the D-tube and the aft section, and all of the skins for the wing were done as sandwich panels. The difference is about 3/4 of a pound. So if you're doing a 100-pound aircraft and this difference is 3/4 of a pound, that's significant. In order to hold this thing down to 100 pounds, I have to watch every single stinking ounce. So that's a technique that I use to help hold the weight down, is this transfer technique. A little bit more work, a little bit more wasted material in terms of plastic sheeting that it's wetted out on. And you got to roll it up and unroll it. You got to vacuum bag it. But if I can save, around 3/4 of a pound on the entire aircraft, that's a good thing. That's 3/4 of a pound that I can put into real structure. The resin that goes into the foam doesn't do anything in terms of strength. Nothing significant in any way, shape, or form. So to have excess resin going into the foam, bad plan. So that said, I've also looked at other ways where, maybe I can get a better bond to the surface, make sure that this is bonded on good and solid by filling the surface. And, we've all used this. This is the lightweight spackle compound. Let's see if I can pop it open here. It's white. And you use this on balsa filler and all types of different applications, made for the drywall industry and other uses. And I have taken samples like the Vinicel here and actually squeegeed the foam in here and then sand it smooth. And discovered that in certain circumstances it actually reduces weight. In others, no, it doesn't. There's almost no difference. And it was a bit perplexing at first on why that was happening. And I used this technique on my original wing to fill the white bead foam that is on the inside of the D-tube, because a lot of resin can go into that thing. There's a lot of voids and so forth to fill. It's very significant. And I got varying results on this. And I thought, geez, I'm filling the cells. And I know that the lightweight microballoon filler that I put on here is about the same density as the foam, a little bit higher, but it's a lot lighter than resin. So where's the weight coming from? What's going on? And I had to go look at this a little bit in order to determine why all this extra work that I was doing to fill the surface and then do the layup was not paying off in reduced weight. Let me show you what happened here. Let me see if I can squeeze over here and get my whiteboard, and I'm going to try to show. I got to look at the. I got the screen pointing me, so I got to hold this. Let me get out of my chair here. This is going to require a little maneuvering. Bear with me. Let me see if I can get this back on the chair back here. You don't need to look at my sorry face. Let me put it down a little lower, where I have the writing. There we go. Okay, so. For EPS, which is expanded polystyrene, which is bead foam, it's what your basic ice chest is made out of. You have these relatively solid beads of foam, and I've just kind of colored them in black. We all know it's white, and you might have some beads missing, like this, or a little void like this, or a dip like this, but they're loosely packed. Depending upon the density you have, 1 pound is loosely packed, 2 pound a little denser, but they have these voids in here. Now, you can come in and fill these with a lightweight filler. Squeeze it across the top, smooth it out, and then sand it off. So then you fill these voids here that I'm showing. And then when you sand it off, you get this. You sand off a layer. And then these areas are actually filled. This is filled, and this is filled. And because the beads are solid, you actually have a solid surface here that's filled. So what you end up with when you fill EPS is a smooth, completely filled surface. That doesn't happen with other types of foam. Now, the Rutan foam, do I have it out here? I don't have it out here. Is a larger cell XPS, which is expanded polystyrene, not expanded, extruded polystyrene, expanded, extruded. There's a large cell version of this that is used for the cores of Rutan-style aircraft for moldless composite construction. It looks like this. These cells are hollow, spheres. It's a thin wall of plastic, and it's hollow on the inside. And they cut it. You can hot wire it. You can cut it and sand it off. But some of these cells are then exposed. They're open like this. And you can go in and fill those. You fill them up with filler, you squeegee it on there just like I did up here, and then you sand it off. Well, what happens when you sand it off is this one's filled, this one's filled, this one's filled, filled. And then you sand it off like this. And this one that was a round closed cell before is now open, and it's not filled because you sanded off the top of it. And that happens in multiple places. Here's another one. So what happens is, even though you filled the surface, as soon as you sand it smooth, you open up other cells, and those are available to accept resin. And that's a bad plan. So you do a lot of work to fill the thing, and you sand it, and you've really only gotten a quarter of the way there, half the way there. So then you fill it again. You go, okay, I got some of them filled, some are not filled. I'm going to squeegee it again, and I'm going to fill up these guys here that I accidentally opened up with my sanding, and then you have to sand it again, and what do you know, you open up more cells, and you're chasing your tail. You're not getting anywhere with that. Now, on the other hand, we have this type of foam, which is an XPS from Dow. Now, this doesn't have nearly the compressive strength of the other foam, but it does have the advantage of it's got really tiny cells. it's done the same way. These are hollow spheres. It's that they're really, really small. So you don't even need to bother with filling or anything like that. You can just come in and lay your fabric on this, and I hope you can see this. Let's see, am I in view? Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. We got stuff dropping off the table. You can lay your fabric on here, squeegee on epoxy on this, and there really aren't any large voids for the epoxy to go into. So you don't have a lot of excess resin wasting your time and wasting your weight. All of the resin that you squeegee on here is needed by the fabric, and you get a really nice bond to the surface because it's smooth. And with this type of foam, you don't add a lot of weight by the foam sucking up extra resin, and you don't have to worry about filling it with microbloom filler or anything like that. Its drawback is its low compressive strength does not allow it to be vacuum bagged. If you vacuum bag this stuff, the vacuum is high enough to begin to compress the foam, and then your final part comes out the wrong size and your foam is all squished, and it's a bad plan. So if you go look, I've provided a link to how I built the spars for my current wing, and the spars use this foam as the core, and you'll see that it's done as a wet layup, not a transfer, but a wet layup, and it's not vacuum bagged, and that's why. But I'm able to squeegee it off, all the excess resin, there's not a lot in the foam, and you really get a good high strength to weight ratio result. So there are purposes and uses for this foam as a quote-unquote structural foam, and it actually has advantages over the other foams that are normally picked for structural components. You just have to make sure that you design it such that there aren't loads imparted to the foam that it cannot handle. And in most cases, it's fine. So, and as I finish here, PVC foams, the Arex, the Divinycell, are pretty much the same as the coarse large cell polystyrenes. They're also open cell, and you have the same issue. If you try to squeegee in microbloom filler and fill them up and sand it down, you just open up more cells that'll accept resin later, and all you end up with is a thinner part over time, which you don't want. So, bad plan. So the best plan, if you're going to do a wet layup, is to use the Dow extruded polystyrene and don't vacuum bag it, and make sure that the design can withstand the loads imparted. Now, I wouldn't use this for a D-tube. I won't use this as a core on the D-tube. In fact, on my D-tube, I'm using Arex, as you know, and I'm doing the transfer type layup to ensure that I don't get too much resin in the foam. So that tells you a little bit about some of the challenges involved in creating ultralight aircraft and the things that we have to think about when we do that. The interesting thing is that for the Rutan type designs, because they're large powered aircraft, those few ounces don't make any difference, and they actually mix up a slurry of epoxy and microblooms, and they just squeegee it into the surface so that they get a really good bond of the fiberglass to the surface, which is perfectly fine for those designs. But if you're trying to be ultra lightweight, not a good plan. You'll just make it heavier. Now, while we're here, I wanted to show you a little example. I talked about the wet transfer layups, and you'll see it's readily apparent here when you don't have the fabric wet enough when you transfer it. And I hope you can see it on the surface here. I'll move this around a little bit. You see some dark areas here, and then you see some lighter areas, and it looks like dots and so forth. The dark areas is where there was enough resin to bond it securely to the foam, and the lighter areas is where it was not bonded well to the foam. Now, this is a practice layup, so it didn't matter, but nominally you would have to throw this part away because it is not bonded securely to the foam. And then when you make the next one, you don't make that same mistake. You transfer this fabric when it's a little more wet and make sure that you get a good bond that way to the foam. But once you have a little bit of practice of using that technique, and you can see it in my videos, it's shown in several of them, you can actually make really good parts that way that are really high strength to weight ratio, and avoid that issue of filling up the foam with extra resin. So I hope you've enjoyed this series so far. It's the first part of it. I have lots more parts coming. I'm kind of recording them all at the same time, and I'll spread them out so people have a chance to share them and talk about them and give me some feedback. and I hope you stick with me for the whole series. And if you don't mind, if you're not already a subscriber, go to that little red button there that says subscribe and click on that and hit notifications, and you'll get notified whenever I post a new part of the series here or any other video that I post. And I really, really like to have the subscribers, because once you get involved with this whole project with me and start giving me some feedback, I actually learn a lot of stuff. And I want to have more subscribers so I can learn more. There's tons of you out there that have experience that I don't have, and it's a two-way street. We learn from each other. So please subscribe and follow with, and be active, and give me some comments, as long as the comments don't run on the line of "you're ugly," because we already know that. So we'll stick with aircraft, and you give me your feedback and suggestions, and we're all going to have a great time doing this. So hope you've enjoyed it so far. Come back for the next segment. It'll be up in about a week or so. Bye for now.